Hello, everyone, and welcome back to A God Shift. I'm your host, Shayna Rattler. I'm so glad that you're here today. But before we get started, I would love if you would do me a favor. So, wherever it is that you're listening to this podcast, I want you to take a screenshot. With that screenshot, I want you to post it on your social media, tag us here at A God Shift, and then I just want to hear your biggest aha moment or your biggest takeaway from this episode. And the reason why I do that is because I believe that there's a lot of people out there that want to do their part in upholding Christian values, and everybody doesn't know where to start. So the more times that these episodes are shared, the more people that we know can be equipped with the strategies and the tips and the tools that we discuss here on these episodes. So I appreciate you in advance for sharing. Well, I'm excited about this conversation. I know I say that all the time, but the Lord has just blessed me with some really awesome guests. So I'm going to read her bio, and then we're going to get started to what I know is going to be a great conversation. My guest today is the president and founder of Christians Engaged. She was a political consultant for 16 years, once leading a firm with 32 clients and 9 people in her office. For years, she worked with members of Congress running their campaigns. She then ran for Congress herself in 2018, becoming the only woman to make the Republican runoff ballot in Texas out of 6 open seats and the only person in the U.S. endorsed by Vice President Mike Pence during the 2018 primary season. Though she came up short, God has been using her over 20 years of Christian ministry experience and political experience to lead this national ministry today. Christians Engaged has been in more than 125 churches since its launch and has had thousands across the United States take their pledge to pray, vote, and engage. Their goal is to reach 1 million Christians by the 2024 general election. I am excited to welcome to the show Bunni Pounds.
Hey, Shayna, it's great to be with you. Let's go
Yeah.
reach Christians together.
Yes, girl. It's like, sometimes I'm like, whoo, it's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it. And you were like running for Congress and running campaigns. So it reminds me of when people say, if everyone was to throw their problems in a pile, most people would rush to get back their own, because it sounds like you did a lot of work during those seasons.
Yeah, it's been a long, I say a long suffering season, but God gives us the things that we need to do the next assignment that He gives us.
He definitely gives us grace for what it is that he's called us to do, which sometimes, many of us, we don't pay attention to when the grace has been lifted to move on to what it is that God has for us next. But that's not the point of this conversation. So, as many people know, my podcast is all about how we uphold and protect Christian values and how we mobilize other people to do the same. And so, I can't think of anyone better to participate in that conversation with me than you. And so I'm real curious because I read this somewhere when I was doing my research on you for this interview. And so I just wanted to ask you, in your opinion, how do you think God really wants Christians to change the world?
Well, first of all, He wants us to love Him with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourself. That's the greatest commandment, and that's what our life is all about, Shayna. When I get to be 85 years old and I'm sitting on my East Texas home, and I don't have an East Texas home yet, but one day, and I'm sitting there and nobody cares what I have to say anymore. I pray that tears are still running down my face because I love Jesus and I love His word. Ultimately, that's what He's after, is our heart.
Yeah.
So our hearts, though aflame for Him, are called to disciple other people and to lead them into truth, lead them into relationship with Him. So that's my greatest calling. Everything else is a blessing. Getting to walk with members of Congress for all the years I have, getting to do government and politics, it's all great. But ultimately, it's about individual hearts that I've connected with through my life. And that's really what God's calling all of us to do, is be the leaders in our world that we're supposed to be.
I find it interesting because I feel like that mandate is a very simple mandate, should be easy one to follow, especially for those of us that say we're Christians. But there's no debate about the fact that when we look at everything that is going on in the world around us, that we're definitely living out the scripture that says there'll be a time where good will be called evil and evil will be called good. So, do you think one of the primary reasons that there's even a need for us to have a conversation about upholding and protecting Christian values is because we've lost sight of that, what should be very simple mandate?
100%. Yeah, I wish Christians engaged, a civic engagement ministry didn't even have to exist,
Yeah.
but we have to exist because liberty needs to be protected so the gospel can continue to go out in our neighborhoods, our churches, and frankly, around the world. So we exist to make sure that your life remains free, dear Christian. Um, so people are like, why do I need to get involved? Well, you need to get involved because liberty needs to be protected, because the gospel needs to go out. It's really that simple. And so I'm excited about what you're doing because training people on the importance of speaking the truth in love, and I
Yeah.
emphasize in love,
Yeah.
is such a key thing for all of us all to do. We have to be bold and courageous in this hour, but we need to see people after the spirit and walk in the spirit and walk in love. And that's what separates us as believers.
Well, I also think that if we're not mindful, first of all, even though Jesus was real tough on people, he also led with grace. I heard someone say a couple of weeks ago when they talked about, well, Jesus hung out with sinners or whatever. And it's like, yeah, what we have to ask ourselves, why did sinners love hanging out with Jesus so much? And it's because he did not condemn them. And one of the things that I always have to make sure that I remind people of, especially when I'm being interviewed or they're talking about this new assignment that I've been charged with, is that if we don't, we can, number one, we can't change what we don't love. And if we don't learn how to approach truth with a combination of love, then all we're going to do is just cause more division. And Lord knows we're not in a space right now where we need more division. And so we absolutely have to look at, if you give them all truth and no love, you're not going to reach them. If you give them all love and no truth, you're not going to change them. And so we have to try to figure out kind of that science and art of how we do that. Do you have any tips for, like, how do we get back to just loving Jesus and loving one another and trying to find some form of unity? Do you have any tips for how we could do that?
Well, I just finished writing a book called Jesus in Politics. And frankly, I think it's a intimacy with Jesus book disguised as a political book because I want to drive people back to three things. Number one, meditation on the word of God. If we're not going to Jesus every day and meditating on his word, what do we have to give, right? Worship, just knowing that he's worthy. He is worthy of our worship. He is worthy of our life. That thrills me when I think about how worthy he is, and it makes me want to worship, girl. And then prayer. I have a whole chapter in the book called Teach Us to Pray. If we're not understanding that we need to go to the place of prayer and be dependent on Jesus every day in his Holy Spirit, what do we have really to give?
Right.
So, I really want to focus in that Jesus is a person. He's a person that we go to and we have communication with and we talk to. And that truly is what separated me even in politics. You think, how what does this have to do with politics and government? Well, if you go to a member of Congress and you become their friend and you're their staffer, and they realize there's something different about you because you love Jesus and you spend time in his word, in worship, and in prayer, well, all of a sudden they come to you for wisdom and understanding. And
Yeah.
they ask you for marriage counseling and they ask you to pray over their fears and they ask you to give them life coaching. I mean, this is what happens when we walk with Jesus. So, if we want to really be influence changers and change the world, it really goes back to the simplicity, Shayna, of just walking with Jesus.
Yeah. And I think if we think about what God's original purpose was for our lives, it tells us in Genesis, he says, I'm going to make man in my image and my likeness so that they can have dominion. And I believe that that's a lot about what you're talking about. If we learn how to love him and live as he lived, because it says we're like him, then I do believe that we would be able to exercise dominion a lot more effectively and have change. And so I just want to ask you, like, with hostile environments all around us, with difficult conversations having to be had at every turn, whether it's with our children or with the school boards to defend, our children. How do you recommend that we live like Christ in a hostile environment or in tough, difficult situations?
Well, get prepared, get prepared in the spirit and get prepared in the natural. Here at Christians Engaged, we help Christians with seminars, on demand video curriculum, teaching them about local government, school boards, county government,
Mm.
state government, and federal government. There's a lot of nuances as it relates to interacting with government. And you need to know that. You need to know, kind of be prepared, but also be prepared in the spirit. I talk about in chapter 8 of my book about the boldness of Joan of Arc. That boldness and courage is not born in a vacuum. We can operate in human zeal and passion. And, we were young once. That only goes so far. But courage is really when something hits you that you don't expect, and there's something that internally rises from your spirit that says, I'm going to take this on. For me, 18 months into this ministry in 2021, we were denied our tax exempt status by the IRS. Now, that's not a battle I wanted to pick. I want to pick a battle with the IRS? No, that's ridiculous. But, that's what came to me. And they sent me a letter saying that Christians Engaged is denied your tax exempt status because Bible teachings are typically affiliated with the Republican Party and candidates, end quote. This was in their exact IRS letter. They went on to say, because you're teaching on the sanctity of human life, biblical justice, debt and taxation, the nation of Israel, these things are inherently Republican, and therefore you're not nonpartisan. So, Shayna, everybody, time I say this, everybody's like, wow, that's crazy. It is crazy. How in the world did the IRS ever write that letter? But they did, and they sent it to a little Christian ministry in Texas called Christians Engaged. Well, what happens is, I'm a former congressional candidate. I ran congressional campaigns for years. I just walked the letter over to my friends at First Liberty Institute, Kelly Shackelford, who does all the First Amendment cases. And they said, oh, wow, wow. Yes, we want this case, please. Well, our board had to make a decision now. Are we going to fight the IRS or not? And thank God that there was a little bit of courage and a little bit of stability in our spirits to know we can step out in faith. God's going to meet us. And we became a national story really fast. Like, I went on Fox News 3 times. It was like, whoop, what just happened here? And it became a national story. Why? Because it would have affected every Christian ministry and church in the country if
Yeah.
that case had stood. And thankfully, with our friends at First Liberty and a whole bunch of brave members of Congress that wrote a letter to the IRS commissioner, the IRS folded like a cheap suit. And 21 days later, they said, here's your tax
There you
exempt
go.
status. So I say all that to say, we can have human zeal and human passion, but at the end of the day, courage is born out of knowing God and standing in that place. So when something hits us, we have something to pull from.
And I also think that it puts us in a better position than what it is that we normally lean on. We normally lean on clarity and confirmation. And it's like, no, you don't need a ton of clarity. As long as what it is that you feel like you're getting ready to do is not in contradiction with the word of God, take a step and see how it is that God responds. I say this all the time. I guarantee you that Esther did not have clarity when she went before the king that could cut off her head, but she had obedience and she had courage. And I love that you said that, because I think that that is really the hinge that will swing the door towards all the things that it is that we're taking a stand for, is that you have to have courage. You don't have to go guns a-blazing and being rude. And like I said, if we're not balancing it with love, we're going to cause more division. But it does require a tremendous amount of courage to have a tough conversation. It requires a tremendous amount of courage to take a stand for something that it seems like everywhere in the world is for, what it is against what it is that you're for. And so I love that you talked about courage. I also love that you talked about some of the steps that it takes to be prepared. because I have a saying that you have a role in God's will for your life. And I love some of the examples that you gave because I think many of us, and at one point myself included, thought that when it came down to government and how things were done, that my only job was just to vote them in office, and then it was up to them to do everything else. And so I love that you shared some of those examples about some things that we can do and ways that we can get involved, because it's not just the people that we put in office whose responsibility it is to take a stand for what it is that we care about, that there are actually some things that we can do to get involved as well.
That's so good, Shayna. And let me go back to your previous point too. So many people, specifically in the charismatic Pentecostal world, we love them, we're all a part of them, have a tendency to wait and do nothing because they haven't heard a word from the Lord. Let me encourage you that the Lord has spoken in
Yes.
his holy scriptures. And if it says that the unborn is worthy to be protected because he knew you in the womb before you were born, then just stand on that. If you know that debt is a horrible thing and we shouldn't be running up the national debt and deficit spending in all forms of government, stand on that. You don't have to have a word from God to get involved in these things.
Yeah.
You have the word from the Lord already. If you know Israel is God's holy people and he loves the apple of his eye, then stand up for the people of Israel. Do it. So yes, that point, and then also you cannot underestimate the power of a Christian prepared. Whether, we train Christians all the time how to testify in front of a bill down in Austin or in our state legislatures, how to go to a school board meeting, how to go to a city council meeting and get prepared. It is not that difficult to do, but it takes a little bit of effort to get outside your comfort zone and to learn and listen. Listen, go to a meeting. I went to a Republican state convention back in 2004, and I testified in front of a platform committee on a school choice issue. And I got hooked that I could change the platform. I could make a difference. This little homeschooling mom could make a difference. And if I imagined 20 years ago what is happening in my life now, I would say that is crazy. But it
Yeah.
took one step of obedience to show up, to sound off, and to ask people questions. And that is what we're trying to do with Christians Engage, is get Christians that have been sitting on the sidelines for so long. They feel the burden of the Lord of what's happening in our country. They are looking at the news, girl, and they're like, God, help this country.
Yeah.
What if God wants to use you? What if you are the intercessor that should stand on the front lines and intercede on behalf of the kids in your school district? What if you're the person that's supposed to fight corruption in your city? What if you're the one that's supposed to write the letter to the mayor against the let's celebrate pride all month long in June?
Yeah.
Maybe you're the one that's supposed to do that. I think we underestimate the power of our voice, and I love that Christians are starting to rise up in this hour.
You mentioned many things that it's going to take. The other thing it's going to take is numbers of us that are going to be willing. When I talk about what a God shift is, and it's not just about us upholding Christian values, but it's about us mobilizing other people to blaze the same trail. Because if there's only a certain number of us that are willing to do that, it's going to be less difficult for us to have impact. And when you're talking about getting involved in the school boards and your city council meetings, other things that are going on, I'm just crazy enough to believe, Bunny, that if there are enough of us that believe like we believe, as there are of those that are putting this foolishness in place that is ruining the foundation that this country was laid on, that there might be some change. But if there's going to be 100 of them and two of us, it's not impossible, but it's going to be a lot more difficult for us to really be able to affect change. And so I just love these tips that you're sharing. So we're going to take a quick break. And then when we come back, we're going to share some other things that individuals can do in order to be able to have impact. We'll be right back.
God is commissioning women leaders to uphold Christian values and change the course of history for his glory, and to mobilize other women to blaze the same trail. Want to know what type of kingdom leader you are and learn specific strategies to impact change based on your type? Find out by going to kingdomtrailblazerquiz.com. upholding.com right now.
All right, welcome back. Thank you for that quick commercial break. So, we're talking about how Christians can get engaged, how we can have impact. I've got one last question that I want to ask you before we start to talk more about Jesus and politics. One of the things that people ask me, well, Shayna, what exactly are you creating? Are you teaching people how to start a new business or how to create a platform? And I'm like, no. What this is about is looking at where you already have influence and authority, and how you can weave in upholding Christian values, how you can get engaged where you already have an audience. And so I share a lot on these shows. I share a lot on my social media, but I would just love for you to share one or two ways. If we are someone who, and it doesn't, listen, when I say an area that you have influence and authority, it doesn't necessarily have to mean because you have a podcast, because you have a book, but you all have social media, you all have families, you all have friends, you have environments that people will listen to what you have to say. So, outside of how we can get involved with some of the more organized structures that are going on, what would be some things that you would share with someone of utilizing what's already in their hands to impact systems and individuals?
Well, Shayna, we need to be walking with Jesus. I know I'm a broken record here, but we need to be obedient to what he says. And I think that is the greatest testimony that we have. After my race for Congress, it was $1.3 million on each side of a race, if you can imagine. You haven't lived till you've had $1 million spent against you and your family. It's a whole nother level. Well, I'm trying to overcome my offenses, bitterness, and unforgiveness. And I found out that my opponent, his consultants, had floated all of his invoices from the runoff. So if you can imagine, I outraised him by $300,000 and I couldn't win because his consultants had floated his invoices. They didn't bill him till after the runoff for all his mail, TV, radio, consulting fees, all of it.
Wow.
And I saw that on his FEC report about 6 weeks after I lost my race by only 2,700 votes out of 43,000 votes, by the way. It is very close. And that struck my heart. And I'm like, God, this is so unjust. Now, I could have just wallowed in my depression, which I did for a while, I have to admit. But, I could have just wallowed forever. But 9 or 10 months later, God spoke to me and said, the only way you're going to get over this is to do something drastic. And so I called my former opponent, now Congressman Lance Gooden, and asked him if I could take him out to lunch and then if I could pay off the rest of his debt from our runoff. Now, that was a huge chunk. It was like $50,000 left that he still had from that runoff debt. But I got on the phone. I called all my donors that hadn't given him money yet. We hosted a huge party and we celebrated him and we laid down our offenses, bitterness, and unforgiveness. Now,
Wow.
why do I tell you that story? Because that one act of obedience in 2019, before we started Christians Engaged, has opened so many doors for me as people around the political movements have told that story and been awe-inspired by it, right? And I just want to just remind people, step out in obedience to what God calls you. It doesn't have to be that complicated, doesn't have to be that dramatic. But man, if you pray for somebody that doesn't expect it at your work, if you step in and bless your boss when they don't expect it, when you go bless a school board member that's frankly yelling at everybody in the school district, whatever it is, try to do something opposite than what you think you should do and see what God will do with it.
I think that is a great, great tip that anyone can start doing tomorrow, today, as soon as you listen to this. So before we wrap up, tell us a little bit more about the book, Jesus and Politics. What can we expect from it? Why should we buy it?
Yes, here it is. Jesus in Politics just came out, went to #1 on Amazon in 2 categories. Thank God for the 700 Club. But it's really about my life in Congress, in government politics, walking with members for years. I want you to see that there's so many Christian believers in government that love God, and
Mm.
and that one simple person can make a difference. Frankly, I tell crazy stories of a dream I had with Congressman Beto O'Rourke, who's not of the party that I affiliated with, and how God met us in that meeting. I tell stories of having a prophetic word over my former boss that 3 months later he became financial services chairman of the House. So, what God can use a simple woman. That's what we're trying to do with Christians Engaged. And then we want to encourage Christians to pray, vote, and engage regularly. We do that through a get out the vote system. We built the only get out the vote system for the church in all 50 states, where we encourage Christians to pray every week. And then we send voting reminders around every election in the country through text and email. And then all the classes that I referenced earlier, teaching Christians how to get involved. So we want to see every Christian get engaged in this moment right now. We can help you.
I just love you. I just love what you're doing. So how can they follow you on social media?
Bunny Pounds, Bunny with an I, everywhere. Instagram, Twitter, I guess it's X now, all of the platforms. Christians Engaged, it's Christians with an S, Engaged with a D, all the social media platforms, and then christiansengaged.org to take the pledge to pray, vote, and engage and start moving forward. Every Christian, we want to help you with the roadmap to get going. Every Christian, Shayna, should be praying at least once a week for their government. We should be voting in every election. You should never miss an election again. And we will help you start engaging and, doing Jesus and politics, that kind of crazy life. It's fun.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to make sure that the links to the social media and the place that they can take the pledge is in the show notes. So all they have to do to click it, all they have to do to access it is to click it. So, Bunny, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your nuggets with my audience. I appreciate it. I know it's going to be a hit. Everyone, share, share, share this episode far and wide. I pray that it's blessed you and that you will go back and listen to previous and future episodes as well. Everyone, have a good day. Bye bye.